On August 18th, 2010, a 30-year-old scuba diver went for a night dive in the underwater caves at Vortex Springs in Ponce De Leon, Florida, and was never seen again. Extensive searches of the caves, which go over 115 feet deep, by at least 16 professional recovery divers, yielded absolutely no sign of the man and have left many questions over the years about what happened to him. Did he get trapped underwater? Run out of oxygen? Was he really down in those caves when he disappeared, or did something else happen to him that night? You're listening to Creep It Real, and today we ask, what happened to Ben McDaniel?
Creep It Real is a weekly podcast where we present our theories of the subjects we cover based on our interest and research. Some material may be graphic and disturbing, so proceed with caution.
Hey everybody, it's Ashley. I'm not Ashley.
That's okay. That's Shy over there.
I'm Shy. That's Ashley.
Yeah.
We are Creep It
It's
Real.
me. Yeah, we are Creep It Real. Today we're going to cover a story that, while the man may not have been as certified as he needed to be, the story itself is a certified doozy.
It is. It's
such a dumb joke.
It's creepy in its own right.
It's sad as well. Like, I'm not trying to make light of it, but there's just a lot of very weird
it could have been avoided
circumstances
or something.
Whatever. I mean, I don't even know what happened. I mean, truly. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that at the very beginning. Like, at the very first, I'm like, don't have any idea. Okay. But we're talking about Ben McDaniel, and, you know, it's also, I don't know if I'm the only one that felt this way, but there were like certain times when reading about the circumstances of cave diving and some of like the things that can go wrong, I got very heebie-jeebs.
Well, I guess we should tell everybody he was a diver of sorts. Well, he wanted to be a cave diver, but through research and watching videos on it and whatnot, I happened upon some videos of divers doing recovery trips, and they are so eerie because the ocean can be very peaceful and calm, yet it is so deadly. And just seeing this dead body just laying at the bottom of it, and it's quiet, and you have to think like how weird it was, must have been for you to go in this way that's almost peaceful alone.
Yeah.
And one of the divers said that, 99% of the time there's no rescues. They're just retrievals.
Yeah.
It's very rare to find someone alive.
Yeah, it's like, all of them are pretty much. But you know what's so crazy about that is I just read a news story that just like popped up in my feed, probably because of my searches.
Of course.
About, I think it was in Mexico or Brazil. I think it was Brazil, maybe, that they actually just rescued a man that was trapped in a cave diving, and the only reason that he survived, like, something went wrong with him and his partner's equipment, so they realized they didn't have enough gas. And one of the men turned around. The other guy was left in this little air pocket, and he was there for 33 hours. And I was like, are you kidding me right now? That is crazy. I think it just happened. And I was also thinking, like, during all my reading, those like air pockets that are in caves, those sometimes need to be like filled with the correct gas mixture in order for you to be able, or I guess just filled with oxygen in order for you to be able to breathe in them. They have to do that at the underground caves that we're going to talk about today. So anyway, crazy. He was rescued and he survived. So that was like one of the very few people that have ever been actually rescued out of a cave.
Wow.
Yep.
That would just be so frightening, because
count me out on the whole thing.
Yeah, no, don't ever want to go underwater cave.
There's nothing less appealing sounding. Okay, so let's get started. So Ben was born in Tennessee to wealthy, supportive parents. Their names were Shelby and Patty. He had two brothers, Tim and Paul, and a half-brother, Brad. And they, like I said, as they were fairly well off, they spent a lot of vacations going on adventures to the ocean, the different oceans, I guess, the mountains, and they were always skiing and doing like adventurous type activities. So they say from a young age that he was fearless. He was an adventurer that was always ready to tackle a bigger challenge, which we'll see this slightly come into play as we move along.
They were saying, from the age of 15, he was diving, but he was literally in his pool derping around with the tank.
Right.
That is not the same as diving in the ocean.
No. And like they said that they think like on vacation, if they went to the ocean, that he would do scuba dives. But yeah, I didn't know anything about diving in general. I know a little bit more just from researching, but I mean, I'm still no expert. But it takes a ton of certifications and like classes and mentorships and all sorts of things to be able to really be a diver that's not just like risking their life 100% every time they go out.
Right.
Even though,
well, there's a lot of like, experience, hands-on experience that goes with it.
right.
And you got to kind of push yourself out of your comfort zone, I assume, to get better. You're not going to, exploring the coral reefs isn't going to get you that experience that you need to be a cave diver.
Right. So, I mean, there's like, well, we'll get into it as we go, but like, there's a lot of technical matters that kind of come into play. So, by his mid-20s, with the support from his parents, Ben started a successful construction business. He was married and he had a large home in Tennessee. By all accounts, he had a ton of friends and close relationships with his family. Everything was great.
Right. And I mean, he was so young too.
Right. And then, it's one of those situations where, I mean, it always helps to have like financially supportive and just supportive parents, or who are well off enough to be able to help you like that.
Right.
So then the recession struck, and that whole debacle, I worked in construction at the time of the recession, and it was brutal. Like, I mean, it was like, I know, I'm sure, but Kevin was also,
Yeah. He said he had to sell everything to keep food on the table because like there was just no work.
It was, it was crazy. So anyway, he also, I guess, had a shady business partner that I don't know what he did exactly, but it ended up where they owe the IRS like $50,000 in taxes.
Yeah, because after the whole ordeal, because his company ended up going bankrupt, and they said that he was $50,000 in debt, which is a lot. But I mean, we've seen worse.
Oh yeah. Plus, with a business, you would almost expect it to be worse, but. Yeah. That also made him leave a bunch of unfinished construction projects not completed. He was forced to sell his $450,000 house, which had an additional $200,000 mortgage on it, which I'm assuming he probably took out to help with his business.
Yeah.
And then that just leaves you with almost over $500,000 of debt, I guess. So that's rough. I don't know exactly what was going on with that situation. The family is like not extremely open about some of his history. Like they kind of at first said that he wasn't married at all for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, he was, because he got divorced.
Yeah, he was married, and it wasn't just for a couple of months, like it was for multiple years, but I'm not sure why they were publicly saying that it wasn't the case. I don't know. I really don't.
I didn't find much about his marriage or how their relationship was, but if she was only there for a little bit, she possibly could have been like, oh, a rich construction man, but once he went under, peace out.
Yeah, that's possible. So that he eventually got divorced from his wife, obviously, we just said that. Then something even more tragic happened in September of 2008, and he found his younger brother, Paul, unconscious and unresponsive in his parents' home. So he would later die at the hospital from a drug overdose of prescription medications that were both prescribed to him and some that were not. But the family, it's a difficult situation here. I feel kind of like an asshole.
Well, I don't think they were very forthright and outcoming about his actual cause of death.
Because, it was confirmed by the Tennessee Department of Health that their findings in the cause of death for Paul were not any signs of a stroke, but were, however, a drug overdose, though his family contends to this day that it was a stroke, and even started a stroke awareness foundation after his death, even though the coroner stated that he died from a drug overdose. So it just seems strange.
I'll be honest, and I don't want to go that far because they obviously weren't as bad, but they kind of give me Ramsey vibes. And her name's Patty. and Miss
Which is what you
Patsy,
always, which is what you always call her. Oh no, you
Nancy.
call her Nancy,
Yeah,
Nancy Ramsey. No, yeah, they definitely seem very concerned with what the public thinks about the situations that are going on here.
yeah,
And obviously, they have gone through some tragic situations.
right.
There's no doubt about it. So, I'm not trying to say that any of this is their fault. It's just that it seems odd that you would go to such lengths to project one thing when it truly wasn't that. They could have started a foundation for prescription drug addictions or something, but I don't know. This left Ben pretty depressed and just feeling like essentially everything in his life had just gone to
Crap.
yeah.
He actually went on some like sabbatical and ended up moving to the Emerald Coast where his family had a beach home,
Mm-hmm.
and his parents were letting him live there and kind of taking care of everything and fronting the cost for him to be there, supporting him.
Right. Supporting him completely. But I mean, truly, there was some really terrible stuff going on, obviously. So this condo was about 1 hour from a place called Vortex Springs, which was an underwater cave where people could swim and go diving and do all sorts of things. Ben had become a regular at this Vortex Springs and was very familiar with all the employees of the caves as well as the divers that were there because he was there every day, practically.
What else are you gonna do when you're living in a home and don't have to work?
Yeah. So he would drive like an hour to this place in the early mornings, and then he would literally be there till well after they close some nights or lots of nights. Yeah, so like I said, it was not uncommon for him to be there into the evening. In the early mornings, his truck was in the parking lot pretty much always. And so in the 4 months that he had been diving, he had logged 250 dives in his log, which sounds really impressive to everybody, I guess, but to people who are actually experienced divers, they question whether that is
valid.
They question if it's valid or also if he was actually being thorough on these dives, like what exactly was going on, because this is something that takes generally someone about like 2 years to log 250 dives.
Right.
So kind of interesting. Like we said, diving is super technical. It requires a ton of experience and certification. Obviously, ideally, you're not going to do it online and you're going to do it with an instructor in person who can also go with you on practice dives so that they can critique you and give you ways that you can improve or things that you've done that could have been life-threatening. There's they said that even the most master diver in the world knows that there's definitely a possibility that he's going to die when he goes on a cave dive. So it's like, this is not anything to play around with. Even for people who do go through all the proper training, certifications, recertifications, and continued education, it's like I can't remember the statistic. I think I might have put it in here somewhere, but it's one of the most deadly activities that you can take part in. So, I mean, obviously, you're underwater, you can't breathe naturally,
right,
and you don't have anywhere to surface to breathe oxygen,
And surfacing alone is like its own scientific ordeal. You have to come up at like a certain speed with certain gases mixed and with your air so that you can get out all the toxic, nitrogen that's in your body, and you have to decompress, and it's
right.
Yeah,
it's a whole to do. Okay, so cave diving is one of the most deadly sports per attempt that you can take part in, even for those that have a ton of experience. Like Shai was just saying, there is nitrogen narcosis because I think when you descend below,
when you get to a certain depth, all the pressure changes and gases start to rise.
I think nitrogen is released from your blood, so it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
And then as you begin to ascend to the surface, and if you do it improperly, the nitrogen just expands rapidly and it can cause like a ton of crazy things or even your lungs to burst. So you could die for sure. And on top of that, there's decompression sickness, which is the bends, which we've all heard about, even if we don't really, have experience with it. But like you said, it's a deliberate process of surfacing. You can't just shoot up. Oh, that said though, I watched some videos of, and when I say master diver, that's somebody that's like as top of a diver, I think probably as you can get. Master divers going into diver panic, and they had to have multiple people holding them down, trying to not let them shoot to the surface as fast as because your body's instinct is to just
Oh,
like get to
yeah.
the surface as fast as possible, and that can kill you. So anyway, these are people who, I mean, are with a bunch of other people. They are super experienced, extremely knowledgeable, and they freaked out and were trying to shoot to the surface. And there was people seriously holding them back. They were like knocking mouthpieces out of people's mouths and doing all this stuff. It's crazy. And then a video I watched that was morbid as hell was this guy literally drowned. And he was a super experienced diver, and like you can just watch at some point he's like swimming towards the bottom, and then he looks at his watch, which is telling, I think it's probably his little computer or whatever, dive computer, I think is what it is, and which I think it tells you where your levels are in your tanks and everything. And he just, I have no idea what they're saying, but he just, at this one point, he just screamed and then began to drown. It was terrible.
Oh.
But he had a GoPro on his helmet, so whenever they recovered his body, they were like, here's I was like, oh my God. Ugh. Anyway, it is the thing of nightmares, for real. All of that stuff. I cannot even imagine
That is
wanting to do that.
terrifying.
I know. So, I mean, but I guess we probably have somebody out there that likes to go cave diving or something. I'm interested to hear from you. But regardless, so this place, Vortex Springs, it had super clear waters, and it wasn't a man-made cave, but it would have been filled with sand and silt had they not excavated it, and they had something that continuously did that every day that would get the silt out of the cave, because otherwise you wouldn't have been able to swim into it. But divers would kick up sand and silt, which could make the waters murky, and that also starts to bring in dangers of people getting disoriented and kind of losing their bearings. Yeah. Which, that also sounds like a real joy when you have limited air and you're just like in an alien world. The whole thing scares the crap out of me.
So one of the main attraction of the Vortex Spring is the cave, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which starts 300 feet from the cavern at a depth of 115 feet. And we posted a picture of the diver with the sign, which has the Grim Reaper on it. And it essentially is saying, like, go back, this is dangerous, enter at your own risk. So what's interesting is that in the 1990s, there was 13 divers that had met their death in the caves. And so there was a key required that only the staff had, and they were supposed to only give it out to certified cave divers, which required 2 months of training, including 125 dives with a master diver or someone equally as qualified to help with that.
Yeah.
Which we come to find out Ben did not
have. He was not adhering to that. So on August 18th, 2010, he arrived to the Vortex Springs caves bright and early, and he was seen on surveillance footage chatting in the dive shop with the employees that worked there. And then he headed out for the first of 3 dives that he was supposed to be making that day. He completed 2 of his dives early in the morning and then 1 earlier in the afternoon. And then after his second dive was complete, you can see him again on surveillance camera returning to the dive shop to refill his oxygen tanks. Other divers noted that he spent much of the afternoon sitting on the dock. He was testing equipment and making notes in his dive log, and many have surmised that he was doing this to just wait for the springs to close so that he could venture past the locked gate that Shai just talked about. And that locked gate was the entrance to much more risky and technical areas of the cave that had multiple restrictions, which are just certain areas that are difficult to pass through. And so this was not like anybody that has a snorkel can come down. Like, this is serious stuff where you're squeezing through tight spaces with oxygen tanks, equipment. You could get snagged on something and not be able to get loose and start to breathe heavy. And any amount of anxiety or panic or anything could be the first step to you losing oxygen and dying. So it is a nightmare. I'm going to just continue to say it this whole time.
Well, I didn't know this because I doubt in the water you notice it, but your equipment can weigh up to like 200 pounds.
Yeah, like all of it. You're right. Mm-hmm.
And he was, what, 6'2", 220? So
210, something around there.
And these are and this isn't your run-of-the-mill cave, they said. Like, normally they're more like Swiss cheese, and you can easily go in one hole and come out another. But this was just a long, narrow tube that kept getting smaller and smaller. So, and there was no turnaround.
No.
So
Yeah. There were some areas where if you couldn't fit through, you would have to go out backwards unless you could fit
yep.
through into like the
Oh,
bigger
heck
spot so you could
no.
turn around. I'm like, I feel like my skin is crawling just thinking about it. Ugh. Okay. So
No, thank you.
yeah, I mean, I am noping right out of there. So the springs closed sometime between 5 and 6 every day, but somehow if divers bought a pass, they were able to dive later into the evening during unstaffed hours. At 6:30, Ben called his mother from his cell phone, which was the last contact that he had with his family. And then following that call, he left a friend a voicemail sounding excited about his third dive that he was going to make that evening, and also telling him that he got a job offer that we will talk about later. At around 7:30, he began to set up for his final dive as the sun set, and he swam through the basin and main cavern. And let's just be clear here. I'm sure we'll talk about it multiple times, but he was only certified to dive in the basin, and that is it. He wasn't even certified to dive in the cavern, but most definitely was he not certified to dive in the cave where there is no overhead air at all. Over your head is a rock and water, So he was technically not certified for anything but the basin, the large basin area at the very beginning of the cavern, and then that led to the cave. So I just want to emphasize that as we read. May or may not be pertinent, but possibly pertinent, I think.
Right.
So he was seen that evening by two employees of Vortex Springs, Eduardo Turan and Chuck Cronin, who were out on a recreational dive themselves. And they spotted him at that locked gate that blocked the entrance to the uncertified divers from entering the dangerous part of the cave, messing around with it. And they just saw him kind of fiddling around.
So the Eduardo guy figured, I may as well go and lock it so he doesn't do any damage to the cage, the lock.
So what he said was at least what I read was that he said, honestly, what he did that for was because he knew that he wasn't going to be there. No one was going to be there. And if he thought what he was trying to do was like squeeze through, because there are holes in the gate because it's really just like rebar put together kind of crappily. But there's a door that is like large enough for you and all your equipment, but that he thought that Ben was going to try to squeeze through one of the smaller holes and then end up getting snagged on the equipment and end up drowning down there, because apparently you can also snag your equipment on stuff really easily and then end up drowning. So I don't know. I mean, maybe
it was probably a combination of both.
Things.
He figured it would probably be better for him just to open it so he could avoid, because he knew he figured he was going to try to get in there anyway.
Yeah, like he couldn't stop him. And it's not his job either to sit there and babysit somebody. Because honestly, Eduardo was actually hired because he was a technical diver, but he was hired to be the one that makes sure that the silt is all getting out of the cave appropriately so that people can dive in there. So it wasn't like his responsibility to make sure that every diver is certified for the place that they're going and blah, blah, blah. Plus they're underwater at that point, so I don't think they even talk to each other. And as we'll find out, Ben had a bunch of certifications that were just temporary and not ever completed. So I don't really know how the dive shop kept up with everybody's ongoing
comings and goings,
certifications. And so anyway, and Ben was alone, so most people would try to go with a partner. Yeah, a buddy, because I mean, it's pretty dangerous. So, it can be dangerous even if you have a buddy.
Apparently.
So, like I was saying, there's a number of issues that Ben could have run into down in the caves, especially if he was trying to break into the restricted area. And they could include overexertion. Like I said, it would cause him to use up his air supply too quickly. He might waste precious minutes if he encountered any trouble on his dive. His gear could have got snagged. He could have been waiting for silt to settle if he accidentally kicked it up. Getting lost or disoriented. Needing to cut through tangled line. Like, if those little things down under there are absolutely a huge, giant issue. Like I said, even anxiety and distress can cause you to have an increased heart rate. Breathing can become labored, and your oxygen can be used up way quicker than it needs to be. So, I mean, I'd love to hear from someone that can give me any reasons why this is a good idea for anybody to be doing at any point. They even have scuba divers practice drills to help them moderate their breathing and anxiety if situations arise. Though one can imagine that practicing with an instructor whenever you're, in a controlled environment, your instructor's right there, you really probably aren't going to drown. Might be a little different than when you're down in a cave without them. But, Ben didn't really have a lot of time with an instructor either.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he was ever really going through those drills, at least for what we know. So I don't want to blame Eduardo, I guess, for
It's
the first instinct is like, I can't believe he did that. But when it comes down to it, as we find out more, it really made no difference if Eduardo unlocked the gate or didn't unlock the gate.
well, in a way, you kind of have to hold. Do you hold him a little bit responsible or no?
No, because Ben altered the
Okay.
gate, period. So I mean, I guess
I mean, Ben was a grown man. He knew what he was doing, and not like he knew what he was
yeah.
doing because he's certified, but he knew the risks he was taking.
Well, right. Also, that's another thing in diving is it is known you're taking these risks on your own accord, period. We're not responsible for you. That's like the first rule of diving. But even further than that, what Eduardo and nobody else at the time knew was that Ben had changed the hinge on the gate so that with one of his own device that he would then bury in the sand so that you couldn't see like the end of it and it didn't look suspicious or out of the norm. And this allowed him to unlock the door to the gate without needing the key because it was on the opposite side from where the key was. So essentially he changed a hinge and then was able to use the locked side of the door as the hinge itself. So he didn't need the key to begin with. What Eduardo didn't realize at the time was that Ben wasn't trying to break in or like bend a wire. He was actually trying to take his hinge that he had put there out. And this is something that he had been doing for weeks leading up to his disappearance.
What?
Was taking that hinge.
So he's just kind of being a dill hole.
Yeah, and also he was so I talk about it somewhere, but like the parking in this place, there were people who initially owned this the springs. When they sold it or went bankrupt or something, whenever I think they went bankrupt and then the current owner bought it. Mm-hmm. But when that happened, they still retained ownership of the home that's on the property. So they still live there. And on that property of their home, there's a parking lot that they use for like their guests. Right. But Ben was using it to park his truck a lot of the time because then he could go into the springs or the caves without even having to pay the $25 daily fee. And so if you're pretty much sneaking in and then you're changing the hinges to the door to get into the restricted area, you're essentially acting as though this is like your business? Springs. Yeah. So, that's where I'm like, Eduardo loses all culpability in this situation for me. I mean, it sucks because he was really, according to him, trying to help in the first place because he knew that Ben was there by himself and who was going to stop him from going where he wanted to go. But on top of that, Ben had already altered the locks or the hinges to the gate to get to the restricted areas so that he could open it up without having to get the key from the dive shop. Mm-hmm. So, pretty brazen moves on Ben's part. Oh, on top of that, he said that he felt comfortable leaving with Chuck that night because the owner of Vortex Springs, Lowell Kelly, was staying late that night as well.
Okay. So, yeah, either way, he was a little too confident for his actual skills.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So the next morning they saw his truck.
Thursday, his truck was in the parking lot, but they didn't think anything of it because he was always there in the morning and then late at night. But he was missing for multiple days before they realized it.
So a couple days later, they noticed his truck was still in the parking lot and they hadn't seen him or heard from him. So Taryn decided to call the county sheriff's office at this point.
Yeah.
And they got there. And they did the typical crime scene thing. They taped it off. And, I mean, there was no sign of Ben at this point. There was no equipment or signs of him having resurfaced.
Right. And like we said, his truck was there.
Yeah.
Still in the same spot.
I mean, there's a theory that this was a hoax, but they did find, what was it, $1,100 cash in his wallet?
Yeah, he had $1,100 in his truck. He had his keys. Like, his truck had a bunch of stuff in it. But $1,100 is a pretty significant amount of money if you're trying to...
Yeah.
Unless you just have a ton of money and you're trying to make it look like that's,
One of the saddest aspects was that they did find his dog, back at the house who had been unfed for 2 days.
Yeah, which he was like a rescue dog, and his family says there's no way he would ever have left her without
They were close.
lining up somebody to take care of her. Like,
Right.
he took her everywhere, but he didn't take her that day because he said he was going to be going on so many dives that he knew he was going to be in the caves all day, so he left her at home.
Right.
But shortly before the police arrived, Eduardo had geared up and began to search for Ben down himself because I think he was like a certified rescue diver himself. He would, I guess this happened I wouldn't say frequently, but it wasn't necessarily infrequently either in these caves because it's super dangerous. So, like, I think Eduardo himself had been kind of the person who, whenever something like this happened, he would dive down, and if there was a body, he would end up tying a line to the area so that they could get back down to it easily, like the other rescue divers.
Yeah.
Or recovery divers.
He obviously had enough experience to be able to do this.
Yeah. So while the police were waiting for Eduardo to surface, another diver who had been down there earlier had said that the gate was open, but that they did not see Ben anywhere on their swim. So it's at that point that they notified his family in Memphis of his possibly having drowned, and his mother, father, and girlfriend all began to drive I think it was like 7 hours to get to the springs. So law enforcement began to contact local divers that were certified in rescue and recovery to aid in the location of Ben's body and likely retrieval of Ben's body. So these divers began to put together rotating teams to start the search for him. So they were setting up groups of I think it was 4, 3, and 2. But I wanted to kind of talk about the setup of the caves and everything a little bit, just so that you can have a better idea about what it's like. And I'll post pictures, but still, I would like to also describe them a little. So at Vortex Springs, there's the basin where the divers can swim, snorkel, paddle, and kayak, and that is where Ben was certified to dive, in that basin. This freshwater spring is a constant 69 degrees and produces about 28 million gallons of water each day. It sounds really lovely in that area. I'm like, yeah, I'd like to be in the basin, but that's about it. So, like I said, it wasn't initially something, this tunnel, this cave, wasn't initially something that you could actually swim into because of all the sediment, but the original owners cleared it out and allowed divers to be able to go into it. The springs are shaped like a long tube, kind of like a half cylinder. There's only one way in and one way out. There's very few cracks and crevices that could hide a diver who has drowned. So it's not like this wonderland of large gaps in the rock and places where you could possibly have a body hidden.
It's pretty straightforward.
Right. Okay. So beyond the basin is the cavern. And the cavern, obviously, it's there's a high ceiling. You can surface and breathe oxygen, and you're not limited to just being in the water with rock over your head. But still, Ben was not certified to dive in the cavern. You can still get some sunlight, and, it provides some visibility. At the back of the cavern is the cave's entrance, where you enter and you lose all sunlight. So not only, when you're thinking about this, I'm not thinking about it in the sense that it's not going to at least be bright in this cave. It's not only is it crammed quarters where you have nowhere to surface, but it's also freaking dark, except for your stupid headlight or flashlights or whatever you bring. Not to talk bad about you if you like to do this, but are you out of your mind?
Seriously.
Are you crazy? Oh, it's so scary sounding.
It just brings me back to the movie The Descent, and I don't care if people thought it was a cheesy movie. It scared the heck out of me, gave me claustrophobia.
It was pretty scary.
I'll never...
And they had at least air.
Yeah.
They at least had air. So then this is where that infamous gate Shai talked about is placed. It's a stop sign. It's pretty much telling you to turn around because you're going to die.
Pretty much.
And if, anything that you do forward is at your own risk. So it's then that you reach a point. It's called the piano room. It's one of the cave's larger rooms that's given its name because of the interesting sounds that divers' exhaled breath makes inside of it. There was actually a video that was taken. One of the divers was filming their friend, and then he was in the room. in the piano room with
Okay.
them,
Hmm.
and he got caught on their video, and he was struggling to not, he was like at the very top of the water, like he couldn't
Ugh.
get down, but he was like, great dive today, you know, on his Facebook, because they noticed it on the video, and that's like obviously a very amateurish thing, that to not be able to gain your buoyancy, but also he was using a side mounted tank, and it was probably a new thing to him. I don't know. He, you know, he just kind of started doing stuff. At the time of Ben's disappearance, there was an unexplored and impassable graded tunnel off of this piano room that had not been excavated for exploration, and there was no sign of tampering with that grate or any signs of disturbance in the sediment in front of the tunnel, just to clear up if anyone was going to bring that up and like, try to suggest that maybe Ben got into that, which is definitely not possible. Beyond this point, the cave flattens out a bit as it leads to the gate. It's about 115 feet deep, and it's made of welded rebar, like I said. Beyond this are the more difficult to traverse caves that it is believed that Ben explored the night that he went missing. The initial searches of all of these areas came up empty, and it required divers to begin exploring the more dangerous, tighter areas that were beyond the gate, which are not fun. The restrictions, which are areas that are difficult to squeeze through, they require divers to at times remove their tank completely in order to push it in front of them first and then squeeze their bodies through after, which like, are you
Well,
kidding
okay, and
me?
think about it. Like I said, he's a big dude.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
he,
some of these I even wonder if he could even get through.
I don't know, without
Oh,
getting stuck at least, you know?
yeah,
But
right.
he wasn't in the hole.
Right, I know. The tightest confines even require divers to turn their heads sideways so that they can fit through it.
Uh-uh.
Do you really think his body is smaller than his head? But I guess, like, because you have fat and stuff that's squishy, maybe it's easier to... No, dude. I'm like, if you have to turn your head sideways, you got to be a pretty skinny person to
Yeah.
get through that.
Well, then you gotta take in consideration you have a tank on you, flippers,
Yeah.
you know, so...
Well, that's the saying that they take their tank off and push it through before them
Oh, God,
so that
that's
they
scary.
can fit through. So just beyond the gate is the first restriction, which is a hole that is 4 to 5 feet wide, 3 feet tall, which a diver would drop down to swim through and then enter a small room. And above and to the right in this room, this small room, is a fissure in the rock, and down to the left is a dead end called No Way, because there's nowhere to go there. And like a fissure is obviously just like a crack in the rock, but they really emphasize that these cracks in the rocks here are not enormous, even remotely large enough for Ben's body to somehow
Right,
squeeze
get stuck
into.
in?
Because they say that if you panic down there, since there's nothing to like ground yourself to, that sometimes divers do, whenever they have diver panic, they do wedge themselves into places that you wouldn't otherwise think that they could fit
Right.
into, and then
like
get stuck and drown.
air pockets and little crevices and whatnot.
Yeah, right. But that in this one, it truly isn't big enough for that,
Right.
for Ben's 210-pound or whatever body to fit through. So pushing past the No Way and the fissure is the next restriction, which is called the back mount squeeze, which is a long flat passage that divers describe as back to belly, because they cannot fit their gear through, and they have to use side mounted tanks to fit through there. But they said that like a really tiny person could use a back mounted tank and try to slide through on their belly, but that most people wouldn't be able to fit through that way, which sounds delightful.
No thanks.
Oh, so in this second restriction, the diver would use a special tool that looks like a dumbbell almost, and they insert it into the sand so that they can pull their body and their gear forward through the low ceiling so that they can actually move forward. So much fun. This is slightly exhaustive, and then from that restriction, they would enter a room that it has an almost vertical opening into an area above that they call the max headroom, because they're able to get off of their belly and have room for their head without being down horizontally laying on the sand. That's like, this is the only place where you cannot be laying pushed into the sand by a rock. And then if they look down, they'll see a drop that goes into the third restriction, which is an area called the champagne bottleneck. And it is called this because it's a long, skinny tube. Think about like a champagne bottle, at the top of a champagne bottle. And Divers have to remove their tanks and gear in order to push it through before them and then squeeze down after it. And obviously, that takes a lot of training to be able to take your tank off and push it through off of your body in
water.
the water. Going through this tunnel.
In a restricted space, too. You're not free to move around and twist and turn every which way.
Plus, they say that because the opening is so small that the current can be a lot stronger at this point than in other areas of the cave.
Oh, gosh.
It's delightful. So past the third restriction, the diver would find a small 4x3 room where they could prepare themselves to push through to the fourth and last restriction. And in order to do so, they would have to rid themselves of any gear over 20 centimeters? Hell.
7.8 inches.
Okay. So in order to do this, they would have to rid themselves of any gear over 7.8 inches, leaving only their 8-inch wide tanks to take with them. Maybe 8 inches wide to take their 8-inch wide tanks with them. Ahead of them would be the rocky, cylindrical ceiling sloping down the sides into the sandy bottom, and that's it. That's all you got. The approximate 15-foot tunnel requires them to once again crawl along on their bellies, pretty much in the dark.
I want to, what makes you want to do this? I don't get it.
I have no idea. I really don't.
It just sounds terrifying.
It only gets worse. So as they continue forward, the cave height shrinks to about 12 inches high and 3 feet wide. And they cannot...
That's a foot!
Yeah, yeah. They can... At this point, the diver cannot turn around unless they make it all the way through the tunnel. And then if they, like I said, if they cannot fit, they will have to go back through the fourth restriction backward and hope that they don't get caught on any of the jagged rocks. Plus, wriggling through that tight restriction can kick up silt and sand and reduce visibility to 0 pretty fast. And then it's at this point that the ceiling drops to 10 inches and shrinks down to 2.5 feet wide. Like, are we kidding?
Can my leg even fit in it?
No, I know that. I was thinking about that. I was like, what? My butt and my legs. I'm like, is this possible even?
No.
I mean, really? Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, geez. Oh, because here. Okay. 2.5. Okay. Okay. As the diver moves forward, it shrinks. The passage tunnel, it shrinks to its smallest point, which is 2 GD feet wide and 8 inches tall. The average human head is wider than 8 inches, which is why it has to, why divers have to turn their head to the side to clear this area. And I'm not talking about for a second. I'm talking about you got to turn your head to the side and like pull yourself along in this little like tight ass space just so that you can get through to this little room. Like, what? I mean, I'm sorry, people. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be mean, but what is the purpose? What? Like, okay, if you look at your pinky tip to your thumb, that is 8 inches. So that's as tall as the ceiling.
The hang loose sign.
How my butt is not fitting in.
There's no way.
That space. I really don't think so. I mean, I don't think so, man. I do not think so. Okay, no. So I guess I'm out for the cave diving, even if I wanted to do it. So getting past this fourth restriction is so difficult and dangerous that less than 10 people have done it. After that scary as hell choke point, there is a 20-foot long, 5-foot high, 4-foot wide room that they nicknamed the trash room, and it's just big enough for 2 divers to be in there, turn around, and go back the way that they came. Past this trash room is what they call the end of the line, where there is a crack in the rock where it is said a very, very tiny person could possibly wedge themselves in part of their body if they got in a panic, or if they planned on never coming out of the cave again. It does not open up to anything further. It is simply a crack in the rock, and then it closes back up and becomes the rock again. Again, Ben was 6'1" and weighed between 210 and 220 pounds.
So that makes no sense to me. It's like shoving a watermelon through,
Yeah. I mean, and even
a soup can.
In the water. Because, like, that would be, that would be even more difficult. So, I mean, I hope that gave you some idea about what it takes to get into this cave and to get all the way to the very end of the cave, which I don't know. I'm like, they're kind of saying that maybe that happened. I'm wondering how in the world your big belly and whatnot is getting in there, that 8-inch
I really don't
squeeze.
see it happening. Honestly, I don't.
Because it's not
But
like you're just in a latex suit and you're all lubed up or something. This isn't American Horror Story. This is, you're wearing a bunch of stuff. Even if you're not,
yeah,
like, he has a wetsuit on, which is still not, like, skin tight. You know, it's like, I mean,
yeah,
it's tight, but it's, you know,
yeah.
yeah. Anyway, it just doesn't seem likely, everybody. But the Holmes County lead investigator was Harry Hamilton, and he was assigned to the case, and the investigators searched the grounds of Vortex Springs and the surrounding woods with both cadaver and scent tracking dogs. They were on foot, on horseback, and by helicopter. They searched all the buildings in the area and the spring runoff. They also searched the creek that led to some rivers that were virtually, and like, I know that some of us have seen some slow moving creeks in our lives. Like, those things aren't going to carry a 210-pound man with wearing
No.
other things, you know? But anyway, no sign of Ben's body. According to Ben's father, Shelby, one of the dogs, and it's not known whether it was a scent tracking or a cadaver dog, hit on the edge of the water and jumped in, swimming towards the entrance of the cave. The dog handler mentioned to Shelby that this was unusual, and this occurrence gave the McDaniel family the impression that it was very possible that Ben was still down in the cave.
But it just, once you get more into it, it just doesn't make sense, you know?
Yeah,
So,
no.
anyway.
The dog searches themselves became a point of contention between the divers and Ben's family, as one of the lead divers, Kevin Carlisle, was adamant that neither the cadaver or scent tracking dogs that had been used were trained for a water search. He said that the team of divers gave the investigators and family a list of search dogs that were properly trained for water missions and that they had not used them, instead getting a group without the proper training who could get there quicker. It's still unclear what kind of training the dog that jumped in the water had, or what he was or was not alerting to, but that was the only dog to pick up any scent of Ben in the search of Vortex Springs property. So not much to go off of as far as that's concerned.
Right. They did send in samples of the water to test for certain bacteria that would indicate that there was a decomposing body in it.
Yeah.
And they came back clear, correct?
Right. And they tested him for multiple days, and it came up absolutely negative for any bacteria that are present in decomposition.
Yeah.
And, you know, some people will argue that because the water is like 68, 69 degrees, that the body would not decompose, but it would just take a little bit longer probably, because it's cool water, but it's not freezing. It's not that cold. And there are some fish and stuff down there that would start to, you know,
pick at it.
Yeah. So the first evidence that they found.
So the team of specialized divers found these decompression tanks that typically divers would leave along the way. That way you have something to follow back. And the bends were actually found at the beginning of the cave. They weren't taken along with him. And upon further inspection, they only found air in the tanks and not the specialized gas that would be needed to do the decompression.
Yeah. Like to be able to do the appropriate ascent, because steps, like you have to have, you know, you have to have a certain mixture of oxygen and nitrogen, and this one just had oxygen, and one of them had barely anything in it. Yeah, it was like one of them was they said almost empty, and the other one was halfway full. So they found these two actually only 20 feet below the surface, which is not a depth in which you need tanks to help you decompress. So they couldn't have helped him decompress at all. So but these had his name on them. They were, what were they? They were written down at the bottom in kind of like a square down at the bottom, and like nice, neat, small handwriting. And then there was another tank that was found like just outside the gate that he broke into to go into the restricted areas. And that one was actually full of the appropriate gases and had his name written on the top of it, like around the rim of the top of the tank. So it was brand new. It had a functioning valve.
Yeah, it's like a valve, right?
Like a mouthpiece type of thing.
Yeah.
The other two tanks that they found floating 20 foot below the surface, they had like broken valves. They were basically not, you wouldn't be able to actually use them. One of them had like pliers stuck to the valve so that you could let air out that way, but you wouldn't be able to actually use that in your dive. So it was slightly interesting because those two were like beat up as heck. They were in total disrepair. And then the one that they found by itself inside the cave near the entrance of the restrictions was brand new. His name was written in a different spot, and it was actually functioning and usable. That's definitely like an interesting, maybe means something, maybe doesn't, but it doesn't make any sense why he had those tanks there at the 20-foot level to begin with. Eduardo and another diver named Nick Vatan found the one tank on its own during the sweep of the cave later in the morning on Friday in the side tunnel that led to the piano room. And yeah, it was barely sitting inside the actual cave, so it really wasn't in a spot that was able to help him if he needed gas for, like, if he had some sort of emergency or something went wrong and he, took too long. It wasn't even really in a spot that would be able to help him in the cave itself either. So that was an also kind of weird spot for it to be in. So honestly, even the full tank, it wasn't even appropriate. Its contents weren't even really appropriate to go down as deep as the cave was. They were only for 100-foot dives. So like none of these tanks, like we've already said, but none of these tanks really made a lot of sense as far as taking a cave dive. And to the other divers, the halfway full and the empty tank made little to no sense because you would never halfway fill up your tank and you would always fill it up all the way every time. It's not like something that you just want to put a little bit of gas into because you never know how much, you want to take the most air as you possibly can.
Yeah.
So like this was either reckless or something else happened here that isn't what is being like outright presented to us. So the divers were continuously surfacing without Ben, and his family was just sitting by the shore just waiting for them to find him, but it was never going to happen because he wasn't in there. Well, I mean, some people still think he's in there somehow, but at one point, the second round of divers saw some scuffs on the ceiling on the rocks that the first divers had left, and when they communicated that to the rest of the team, Ben's family overheard and thought that they had said there was a sign of Ben being there because of the scuffs on the rocks. When that team clarified, no, those were our scuffs that we left whenever we were there, that became a point of contention with his family because they said that now the divers were just suddenly changing their stories, which I guess is possible, or they just overheard something and ran with it, and then it was clarified and they didn't want to believe it because it gave them a little bit of hope, So the divers exhaustively searched every crack in the rocks, every single area of the caves that Ben could possibly be, past the gate, into the restricted areas, every single place possible. And even some that wouldn't have been possible because he was a large dude. And there was nothing there. Nothing. There's not any plant life or anything like that. It's just sand and sediment. So the only way that Ben's body could be in there somehow and not be seen is if it was completely buried in sand or something from some kind of collapse that would have happened, but there was no sign of any kind of collapse whatsoever inside the cave. So unless he just like misfrizzled and shrunk down to the size of an atom, I'm not sure if he was lost in that cave. Eventually, the divers and the police had to accept that they couldn't find his body, and then it was recommended that they call Ed Sorensen, one of the most experienced cave divers in the world.
So Ed Sorensen is the best of the best in terms of the diving world and whatnot, and he has the most experience and stuff. So he had gotten a text message on August 22nd, and he came to Vortex Springs the very next day, and they had told him what was going on. So he ended up making 3 different dives, and again, there is nothing that had been turned up, no body, no evidence. And he was saying that during his dives, Ben was such a big guy, there would have been evidence of him scraping along these super small restrictions, but
Yeah.
they were pristine and that there was nothing to be found. His tanks surely would have done something, even his own body, because these are
Right.
limestone, and that's typically a really soft rock.
Yeah. And they
It's
have like an
easily,
orange bacteria also that like grows on it, like
yeah,
a coating. Yeah.
yeah, something would have been disturbed, or there would have been noticeable evidence that he was in there.
Yeah.
So even Ed Sorensen, had confirmed that there was no way Ben would have gotten through these narrow passages because even Ed himself had trouble making through it. And
Yeah.
he admits that he's the most experienced, but even he was like, no, I could barely do it. So there's no way he's doing it.
Yeah. He said, I'm 6 foot and 190 pounds. So he is like a similar size, but like at least 20 pounds lighter, maybe 30.
Which makes a ton of difference.
Oh, that's a
in the
ton
situation.
for sure. And he says he has smaller tanks, and I know what I'm doing, and I barely made it through. The last place I searched was pristine, without a mark that a diver had been there. It would be impossible to go through that restriction without making a mark on the floor or ceiling. He's not in there. He's also quoted as saying that, again, he does not think Ben McDaniel was in the cave, stating that he went on 6 hours of diving in a cave that took maximum 1 hour to explore, because there's not a lot in there, like we said. It's very straight,
Right.
go like cut and dry, forward and backward. And he says, and I saw no sign of another diver whatsoever, that the roof of the cave is covered in an orange-brown bacterial growth that comes off with the slightest touch, revealing stark white limestone beneath, and it was completely undisturbed. So, I mean, and we're talking about, this is somebody that he actually has carried out an actual rescue of a cave diver in his his experience. So he's not some random dude that
Guy.
just like, yeah, this is like the best of the best. And what's even more bizarre, which I probably mentioned it somewhere, but his brother, or like maybe a friend of Ben's, was quoted in like a news story as talking about Ed Sorensen and saying he's even better than Ben. And I was like, oh, okay, like that's interesting, just to see what they thought about his skills. Oh, and there's that fissure at the end of the tunnel again, the little crack, there's a crack. And Sorensen and all the other rescue divers have all said that if anyone tried to squeeze through that crack at the very end of the cave, they would get stuck without a doubt. There's no way that if he went in that crack somehow, that he wouldn't still be there for them to find.
Right.
But his family clung to the only thing that they'd heard that had given them hope, that Ben was somewhere in the cave because of the scuff marks, and they refused to believe Ed Sorensen that he thoroughly explored to the deepest point in the cave and found no sign of Ben, and they publicly stated that they did not believe him. I'm like, I know they're going through grief, but
Right.
oh,
Let's keep a head on our shoulders though, and be realistic about what's really going on.
yeah.
So a total of 16 divers had spent like 36 days searching for him, and there was just nothing to turn up.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's no sign of Ben. There's no sign of his gear, his suit, anything like that. Like his computer. I mean, because you have to wear that computer, like something you would think if he just got snagged in the crack of a rock, you would find something.
Well, and I think we can rule out aquatic animals.
Yeah, there's not.
Nothing's going to be, nothing big enough to drag a man of that size through the ocean is going to be able to fit into this cave.
Right.
And they don't eat wetsuits anyway.
Unless we're talking about a cryptid and there's like some animal that we just don't know about. I don't know. But like Shai said, back at Ben's beach house, or his parents' beach house, his girlfriend found his dog there, who hadn't eaten in days, was very thirsty. She also found books about diving that were scattered all over his bed in his house, as if he was studying diving at any chance that he could, as well as extensive notes and calculations and his dive logs. What they found slightly disconcerting was that at the beginning of his 4-month stay at the beach house, his dive logs were really neat and tidy. Everything was recorded very meticulously, and just it seemed like he was trying to make sure that he was being super thorough and neat and that you could read everything he said. And then as time went on, they gradually became more sloppy and illegible.
Mm-hmm.
They saw that he had begun classes in school, but he had begun to abandon them. He was cataloging all these new experiences. He was cataloging all of these new experiences that he was having and like the knowledge that he was gaining from them. But it was also in a way that seemed, like I said, it wasn't thorough, and it didn't seem like he was actually retaining anything that he was learning. It was more like almost like manic.
I was just going to suggest, it sounds like he's kind of in the middle of a manic episode.
I know. Why does it always sound like someone's in a manic episode?
Sporadic.
Yeah.
And
like
messy.
You have an obsession and like move on to the next obsession before you even have time to really learn the first thing.
And he very well could have been seeing himself in some sort of delusion of grandeur of being this ultimate diver, right. And he was going to explore these caves and show everyone that he's the best.
Yeah, for sure. For example, this is one thing I was like, really? Like, I just can't believe you would... Well, I can, but it's so hard to imagine that you would be so slapdash about stuff when we're talking about something this dangerous. Like in his logs, he detailed that one day he tried out a side-mounted tank for the first time, and in the very same log, he started describing how he was using an unmounted tank for the first time. So like he went from learning a really technical side-mounted tank situation to immediately that very same day saying, okay, I got that. Now I'm going to do where I unmount my tank from my body and push it through ahead of me, which just, or whatever he was doing. I mean, it was just it's something that is a very technical skill to master. And I mean, that's why less than 10 people have gotten through of these restrictions in this cave.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think we talked about it earlier, but he had a notebook filled with temporary certification cards from a bunch of classes that he would go to one and then he would not complete them. And many of these cards were written in his own handwriting, and it made them wonder if he ever even got any of these certifications at all. Also there, they found a log of all the various local dive shops where he was applying for positions, and they felt that Ben was likely using the temporary certifications that he was filling out as proof of his experience, and many of his new friends in the area believed that he was in fact a master dive instructor, which is far from being the truth. Okay, so we have a man who has a bunch of temporary certifications that don't get fulfilled, and they never are finished. I mean, that's like going to maybe like one day of a 2-week course and getting your card and taking off. And in fact, that last phone call that I talked about earlier that he made to his friend where he was really excited about his dive, his friend had said that Ben had told him that a local dive shop had called him wanting him to be an instructor or a dive master. But when they checked this out with the dive shop he mentioned, this turned out to be untrue, which...
What?
Why would he be lying to his friends about that? I wonder.
I mean, if he's having an episode, he'll make up anything, even in his own mind, to validate his own delusion.
Maybe. So, like we talked about earlier when I said that he had logged 250 separate dives in his logs in that 4 months that he was at his parents' beach house, this averages out to about 2 to 3 dives every single day, barring that he did not skip any days. And then if he did skip a day, which we know he did occasionally because he would go see his parents and stuff like that in Tennessee, that would mean that he would need to do even more than 3 dives on other days to make up for it. So I'm wondering, this is an amount of dives that typically takes a diver a couple years, but it was almost like an obsessive priority to Ben to be just knocking these dives out in quick succession, which, experienced divers looked through his logs for the investigation, and they really questioned whether he was putting any of his newly acquired diving knowledge to use in these dives, like we were saying, or was he just trying to get through these as fast as possible to have them as the number under his belt, either for a certification or what, Oh, so it also is said that experienced cave divers diving with something overhead of them have to kind of pattern the movement, so to speak, developing muscle memory in case of an emergency so that they are able to perform the necessary tasks to complete their dive and do it safely. This way, they do not waste precious time and oxygen trying to get their mind right to do what they need to do, which I think we can understand that as like, I mean, not to, but like if you're like squatting heavy, and if you've never done that before and you have whatever heavy weight on your back and you just step out with that weight to squat it, you're
Oh
going to be
yeah,
a dang mess. Your body's just going
yeah.
to freak out,
Your
You have to
your
pattern the
CNS is
movement.
like, for one, not prepped at all. You just
Yeah.
yeah,
And your body hasn't
right.
done that before. So you would panic and probably just, bleh. And that's exactly what happens if you're not experienced and understanding like what you need to do, the way you need to move, what happens when you get nervous, what happens when you get snagged. Like there's just all these little things that can happen that would be deadly in your dive without you having patterned the movement. So he wasn't really seeming to pattern the necessary movements. They also found homemade maps. I don't know if you saw that. He had made homemade maps that had like a bunch of errors on them.
Yeah, he had been trying to map out the cave himself, it seems, and it just wasn't correct.
Yeah. Didn't make any sense. He had a opening at one point, like on his map, he like indicated that there was an opening where Ed Sorensen went and said what Ed Sorensen thought because he hadn't looked at the cave with, I don't know, he didn't, in that perspective, he was like, maybe he's trying to dig a new passage somewhere.
They did find one of those collapsible army shovels that you can easily store like in a backpack or something, and they knew Ben had one. And I believe it was his sister that confirmed that it was Ben's. And they did find that. And
well, see, actually, what I read was that was the person who excavated the caves.
So
shovel.
Maybe they were telling themselves it was Ben's because they wanted to believe he was in there, because he did have one of those shovels, and yeah,
he had one, yeah.
Which
it said that they initially thought it was his because he had one. His family confirmed it, but it was in the trash room, the very end room that they called the trash room, and the guy who excavated it, they call it the trash room because there was stuff left in it. Like after the first person excavated the whole tunnel, the second people or whoever, the second group of people or whatever, to dive down past that fourth restriction into that room, they were like, oh, whoever was here last left a bunch of stuff here. And so that's why they one of those things was the shovel. And so they called it the trash room because of that. And the shovel, I guess, was just still there. I mean, I guess it's also possible that they're lying, but I don't think so. I don't think all those divers are lying because not all, they didn't have affiliation to the springs or whatever. But anyway, but I feel like that's just one of those other things that his family kind of heard initially and kind of ran with because it's the only hope or sign of Ben that they got. And then they had trouble kind of admitting that it wasn't. So instead of being like, oh, okay, actually that's a misunderstanding, they were like, oh, you've changed your story. That's my son's shovel. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not trying to contradict everything.
No, you're fine. It's just there was a lot of weird contradictions because I also read and watched that there was only like $700 in his wallet. So
right, but his family says $1,100.
Yeah.
Okay, but like we said again, also, that shovel was also found past the very last restriction, that very tight space that we had an anxiety attack talking about, and there was no sign on the ceiling of the cave that anybody had been back there at all, okay? So nobody had disturbed that orange bacteria on the ceiling to get to that fourth restriction, even in the first place. So is it really even worth talking about if there's no sign of somebody going past that point until Ed Sorensen did? I don't think so, because Ben's 210 or whatever pound body is going to make some scuffs, period. It just is,
Yeah.
So Kevin Carlisle, he was one of the other divers. He stated that when it came to Vortex Springs, that there really wasn't much to map out, that it was a fairly straight line with one turn. Although it had some extremely tight restrictions, there wasn't a lot to do there. Hence the 1 hour dive comment that Ed Sorensen made. It's very like we said, you dive in if you can, or if you're able to skillfully squeeze through the restrictions, there's not a lot to do. You do that and then you turn around and you come back out. So it's not something where you're just going to get lost for hours on end. So after he outright stated that he did not believe Ben was in the cave, the divers began to slowly but surely drop out of the mission of searching the cave to find Ben. Obviously, because what's the point? Mm-hmm. Kevin Carlisle, that man that I just spoke about, said, "We may never know the truth of where he is, but we do know where he isn't, and that is because of a lot of talented and qualified divers that had searched the caves." Understandably, Ben's family began to become frustrated with the unsuccessful searches for Ben, and especially the fact that rescue divers were not only being fairly outspoken about their belief that Ben was not in the cave, but were stopping their searches altogether. So they asked Holmes County if they could use a remotely operated vehicle to search the cave. I mean, I don't know what that's going to help. I don't know how that's going to help any more than a human, but they couldn't do it.
It didn't,
yeah,
because the cable got too heavy, and eventually it was pretty useless.
Yeah,
and couldn't even go as far as the humans could. So that plan was a flop.
It was a flop, and then it made it like 700 feet into the cave, and it wouldn't go forward any further. And we already know that Ed Sorensen, went all the way to the very end. So
right.
The McDaniels reached out to a man named Steve Keene, who had originally surveyed the cave in 2003. He made 7 thorough dives through all of the restrictions to the very end of the cave, and he said he found no sign that Ben had been there. Then the McDaniel family offered a $10,000 reward for anyone that was quote-unquote brave enough to find Ben. The diving community was obviously offended and asked them to rescind their insulting and dangerous reward, and then they upped it to $30,000.
All they're doing is anybody that's strapped for cash that has some sort of diving experience is going to be like, I'll do it.
I can do this.
And that puts their life at risk.
Right.
Yeah. And what the diving community was saying is, hey, you've had the best of the best. Anybody that's qualified to go do this has done it.
Yeah.
And they've done it multiple times, and you're out of options.
Not for money. It was because they
Not for
had
money.
the skill and they were qualified. Honestly, though, their anger became pretty justified when one of these inexperienced and unqualified divers died during a search for Ben through the restricted areas too.
Yeah.
So that was just a bad idea, I would say. I understand the desperation, but I mean, it's at some point you have to realize that you're putting other people's lives at risk too. There was a woman named Jill Heinerth.
Oh, are you talking about the Australian couple?
The ones that made the movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's weird is they were saying how she was saying how Ben was a good person and they didn't think there was foul play. And I'm like, you didn't even know him.
Okay, I didn't see that.
Anyway.
Well, she is one of the most experienced female, I don't know why there has to be a distinction, but the most experienced female cave divers in the world. And she's known for her documentaries because she films all the dives that she goes on. So she stepped up and she offered to video the entire dive, hoping that she would be able to show Ben's family the footage, and that would give them some peace of mind that the divers are not lying to them or being lazy in their dive. And she and her filming partner ended up that's who found the folded up shovel in the trash room,
right,
which I guess they didn't even think about because they knew it was that man that excavated the cave.
And they're coming all the way from Australia, correct?
I think so.
Yeah, so they're traveling a long way to do this for this family.
Yeah. And they ended up making a documentary after the fact that the family wasn't thrilled by either. So, again, the family thought the shovel may be Ben's. It wasn't. They still dispute that fact that it wasn't Ben's shovel, but, they seem to dispute all the facts of the story.
Right.
They said that they believed that the search divers suddenly changed their story about that and about the marks on the cave that were made by the rescue team. Also, apparently, this is really kind of gross, but when there is decomposition present in the water, apparently divers can actually taste it in their mouthpiece. Ew. So it's like an odor, what they're breathing in the water. And it's this gross, unpleasant odor that comes in their mouth, which is
gross.
So anyway, I'm saying this because they said that there was not any of this present on any of the rescue or recovery dives. And like Shai said, the bacteria for decomposition was not present in the water it was the first 36 days of the search. So that's quite a lot of testing that they did of the water. And I just don't think his decomposing body was in the cave at all, according to just the facts. So there were, like we talked about, there were a bunch of inconsistencies in the story. So like we said, it wasn't strange for Ben's truck to be in the parking lot from the early morning until well past closing time, but I do think it's a little weird that Eduardo saw his car in the same parking spot the following morning after their last physical interaction being one where he was kind of breaking into the cave, and he didn't make any note of it at all. I don't know. I just think it's mildly, I feel like, what's the protocol here at the springs? So you allow divers to dive at their own risk at night without any staff present, and then you don't like try to keep track of their cars and stuff?
Well, I know that they were saying that typically they would wait to see Ben's decompression bubbles hit the surface and then they would take off. But that night they decided to leave early and not wait.
Well, I don't think they left early. I don't know.
Oh, he just never came up.
That's just the inconsistencies, I think, of the story. You know, you've stated outright that you have closing hours and that you don't babysit people because that's not your job. They're going at their own risk. And at 5 or 6 o'clock, you're gone every day. And they're allowed to dive. And so I don't know. So do they usually stay if someone's coming late? Or are they just saying that? You know, I just don't really, I don't know.
Don't know.
It might very likely just be an innocent mistake on Eduardo's part, and I just wonder why maybe the card check policy, there isn't one that's in place, or it's not being because I read that there was one, but they didn't really seem to use it until the following day. Also, though, considering that Ben did not leave a dive plan, he had no backup diving partner or anyone at the surface to assist him, the soonest that anyone could realize that something had gone wrong with Ben down in the cave, it would have been too late regardless of when they realized that, because if it was the following morning, you know, when his truck was there before the day before they actually called the police, he would still have been dead. You know, he was down in the cave since the night before, if he was, you know, so it doesn't technically really matter. He would have been dead regardless. Mm-hmm. Ben had made a Facebook post on August 3rd. So it was just 15 days before he went missing. And he said, I think I had interrupted a video shoot in the piano room at Vortex Springs Saturday night, with a little sideways face. He said it was on July 31st. It had been a fun cave dive, solo and side mounted, of course, with a winky face. He says, so a good ending, getting caught on tape was a plus. Nick from the dive locker was filming while the other diver walked on the ceiling and blew air rings. During the dive, I had been plotting for this upcoming Monday's 8-tank deep penetration solo dive. I will post something on it later. To sum it up, 4 stage, 2 bottom, and 2 decompression bottles for a 232-minute, 148-foot deep cave dive with a total penetration to the end of the system at approximately 810 feet. So, according to that Facebook update, he had a total of 8 tanks, claiming that he had 2 side-mounted tanks, 4 tanks to stage throughout the cave, and 2 tanks for decompressing on his way up to the surface. And also said he was planning a 232-minute dive, which is almost 4 times as long as the other divers claim there is to dive here, considering it's a fairly straight tunnel. So that's also mildly confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So also weird stuff that was going on too. He had sent a letter to his mother for her birthday right before he went missing. And it just expressed how much he loved her and the appreciation he had for them supporting him. And like I said, we could have been reading too much into this, but he said that it had meant a lot to him, which would put him in the past tense. And normally you would say, this means a lot to me. So I don't know. Maybe I'm looking too far into it. Maybe my detective senses are tingling. Mm-hmm. I just found it odd.
Yeah, it does seem slightly strange to word it that way, but I mean, I guess it's possible not to use different tenses. I mean, when I was talking to my husband, he was like, I use different tenses all the time, and I was like, okay, I don't know, we'll see. But he definitely was like doing some seriously weird embellishing of his activities and also just acting strange. So when you couple that with that comment, I feel like it adds a little more weight to it. And also, why was he lying to friends and his family about his credentials, experience, and even the opportunities that were being presented to him? I don't really get it. Like I said, his friend made a comment to a local news station saying that Ed Sorensen was one of the best experienced cave divers around, even better than Ben, when, Ben was nowhere near close to being somebody that was even like 2 certification levels below Ed Sorensen. So he definitely was building himself up to be this super experienced, very technical cave diver. So what happened to Ben at all? Did he experience diver panic down there where he kind of freaked out and somehow wedged himself into a crack in the rocks down in the cave somehow? I don't think so.
No.
Ben was limited in the spots that he would be able to get into due to the size of his helmet, which was over 10 inches, and his big old body. Like, I know that our bodies are kind of malleable, but
a body's
still.
only going to fit where it's going to fit.
Right. You still, it's not like there's the most extreme water pressure in the world pushing him, and there's been, like we said, no remnants of gear, no scraping on the rocks, even like the panic thrashing that he would be doing, he would at least scrape the walls and stuff a little bit if he had done that.
His father was pretty adamant that Ben was down in the cave and that there's no reason why he wouldn't be, and that he wouldn't abandon his dog, and that he wouldn't have put his mother through the death of another child. And also that Jill lady, anyway, she was saying that she is quoted as saying, "I simply see no reasonable evidence that he is not in the cave," and that she believes that he had the shovel and that if he would have gotten stuck, he would have just burrowed himself further down into somewhere, and that there's something that they're not seeing, and that he could be stuck in an air pocket or a crevice that maybe got covered up or something like that. And I just don't see that happening, honestly. I really don't.
I just don't, I don't really think that's possible. I don't think that how thoroughly the cave has been, it's not like they just did a cursory glance. The cave's been searched extremely thoroughly. They looked in all the cracks. Like, he would literally have to have been turned into liquid in order to be in one of the cracks. So I just don't see how that's possible. There are other theories. One of them is that Ben committed suicide by purposefully squeezing into a tight space that divers cannot go to. I don't think so either. He might have committed suicide outside of the water and staged it to look like he was still in the water when he actually wasn't, but I don't think he's not in the cave.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. And the private detective that was hired for the case even stated that there was as much reason to look above the water as there was in it.
Yeah.
And the people surrounding Ben at the time are kind of questionable too, including the owner of the Vortex Springs, Kelly Lau. He had a criminal record.
Lowell Kelly.
Lau.
Lowell
Yeah.
Kelly.
Lowell.
Mm-hmm.
And one instance, he had actually drug an employee that owed him money, I believe, into the woods and savagely beat him.
Yeah. And that was actually like something that was in the paper. It was something that he got, I think he was arrested and accused on a charge of aggravated battery. So it actually happened.
Yeah. And so there were reports too of Kelly saying that the day of Ben's disappearance, that a man had showed up to the shop wild-eyed and seemingly drunk and had asked if it was too late for him to go diving.
Yeah, which, and
I don't know if he's trying to say that was Ben or...
Well, he says that, but I think that I read that they didn't have anyone unusual show up on camera like that, so I don't really know how accurate that statement would be. The time when he was accused of aggravated battery and assault, it was only a year before Ben's disappearance, and he had to pay like $30,000 to the person he did that to, the state of Florida, all sorts of stuff. So it was pretty serious. So, he is a mildly questionable individual, and he did not hold back with the media about what he thought happened. He speculated that Ben planned his own disappearance, was living in the Cayman Islands, all this stuff that he didn't really have any evidence to support, but he still stated it outright.
But why would you leave that much money behind?
I guess if he had a lot more money than that and he wanted it to make it look like that's a lot of money and I would never leave that behind, maybe. But it just seems like, it's not like he had a job. Like, I don't know how much money his parents were giving him.
Yeah.
But obviously they would know, unless they're in on it too, they would have to know that unless he was just like getting a butt ton of money from them and telling them he was spending it on certain things and he wasn't. I don't know, because they would have to know.
He could have been promising that he was going to school and getting all these certifications and was going to get this job and be able to support himself.
Oh, well, I mean, and maybe he was getting money for the certifications in school and actually not going and keeping the money. And then I guess either left that money in his truck so that it looked like he would never, like he didn't leave on his own accord, or actually the Lowell Kelly,
that's right.
He died in December under mysterious circumstances, according to and this is back a few years ago.
I think it's 2011.
2011 that he died. Okay. Oh yeah. Sorry. He had the aggravated charge in 2009, and then in 2011 he died under mysterious circumstances. According to the sheriff's report, he had been drinking moonshine at a party at Vortex Springs, and a friend assisted him home. He fell down and hit his head, and that friend left him in a bathtub overnight, and then he never regained consciousness and died several days later, which is That's
odd to me.
Yeah.
Maybe he left him in the bathtub because maybe he thought he was going to puke, but even then, wouldn't you put them on a bed so where you could roll them on their side?
Or if he hit his head, like, why would you just leave him unconscious?
Was he bleeding?
He could have had a concussion. I mean, so, it's possible something shady went down. Like, there's also the possibility that there was like a drug deal or some other kind of shady transaction with this owner or not with this owner, or maybe that this owner witnessed that went down with Ben and ended up with him being murdered and taken away somewhere, and this Lowell Kelly knew about it and was killed himself by somebody. It's possible. I mean, it's just as possible. That theory, why people are like, that's crazy, it's just as possible as Ben being wedged in this cave somewhere where there's absolutely nowhere for him to be wedged in. So, I think every theory is worth looking at, considering that that's supposed to be a legitimate one.
Well...
Okay, so it's also possible that he was, overconfident regarding his diving skills and went into this cave to a certain point that he wasn't skilled to go to, and not the fourth restriction or anything, but still past a point, past the gate into restrictions that may have been dangerous for him, and he died, and this man wanted to not have any insurance liability or for it to look bad in the springs, and removed Ben's body so that he wouldn't have died on the premises. But I mean, like Shai said earlier, there was a bunch of deaths at this place, so it's not like it's not common. And they have liability insurance. So I don't know if that's really, to me, the only reason Lowell Kelly would have had anything to do with it would be because he didn't die from drowning. I don't know. I guess he could have panicked about it for some reason. Like he thought, well, they would be liable because he got past the gate somehow. We know he wasn't skilled and certified to go into the caves or cavern, so it's definitely possible that he drowned down there. But what happened to his dang body?
That's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know there is that theory that it was removed before search efforts could be conducted to avoid a possible lawsuit because he wasn't certified. They never made sure he was certified.
Yeah.
And he was actually let into the caves by an employee.
Or so they think, but he really wasn't. But yeah, so they think.
Well, yeah.
To me, I guess the more I read into this, the more suspicious I started to become of the family's persistence to kind of deny reality. And maybe they know something, or there are little hints of behavior that they made note of before this Ben's disappearance that they either don't want to share with the police or the media, or they maybe don't even want to admit to themselves, possibly, because how much they went to create this situation that their son had died from a stroke and created the foundation. It's kind of like a break with reality, and it seemed like maybe Ben shared that break with reality as well about his own abilities and skills. And like still to this day, when his parents talk about him, they say that they talk about his fearlessness as almost like they have pride in that. But it's possible that fearlessness caused him to die because you can't be arrogant and fearless when you're talking about a place where you have absolutely no control. So I don't know. I'm definitely do wonder what other things that they would be okay with not disclosing in order to not make Ben look bad.
Well, and it is unfortunate that Lowell Kelly died because it's a person that died, but I feel like he had more to tell, possibly.
Maybe so.
And we just couldn't get to it.
Yeah. Even Ben's dad has stated there's more to the story than is being released, and like one day we'll share it, but I don't know.
Yeah. They're weird to me. I'm sorry. They're weird to me. I think they're hiding something clearly because, and then they also opened up like a grief type ordeal for parents that have lost a child.
Oh, did they?
Or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to say that's weird, but
that's not weird, but I think just they're weird.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely, I'm 100. Okay. So like when it comes down to like what we think or what I think, personally is I don't even know if he really dove to the extent that he claims in his logs, even just based off of like him saying that he was going to dive into the fourth restriction and there was no sign of a body being down there, a live diving body being down there. Maybe he went on shorter dives and claimed they were longer. It may or may not be relevant because I'm not really sure if he drowned or if foul play happened outside of the caves and somebody tried to put those one pointless tanks out where as deep as they could dive. Because like Lowell Kelly, for example, was not a diver and he wasn't able to go down to the caves. So maybe he got those tanks and put them there and pretended like Ben died down in the caves, but what happened to his body and he got rid of it. Something happened to Ben that he either drowned down there, which is probably likely considering his situation.
Right.
But who the heck found his body and recovered it and then took it somewhere else? So maybe he didn't drown down there. Maybe he got out. Maybe he got out. He made a little dive. He got out and either got in a fight with somebody, or maybe he was staying late at night to like do some shady stuff. I don't know, but something happened and somebody killed him and took him somewhere and dumped his body where they're yet to find it is possible.
I think he was having a bit of an episode, just personally. The state of his apartment, the multiple books scattered everywhere about diving. I mean, why not finish one and then move on to another?
Yeah.
The hand signed by him incomplete certifications, which I'm sure do cost a ton of money. It's somebody's time and effort. So like you had mentioned, maybe his parents were sending him a bunch of money and he was saying, I'm getting this certification, and he would sign up for the class.
Take one day of it or something.
Yeah. I don't know if you get your money back or what, and then I did think maybe that Lowell Kelly guy, he's obviously money hungry and greedy. Maybe he found out Ben had come from money and that he had money on him, and he took that as an opportunity to do something to him and, I don't know, see if he could get rich off of it. I don't know.
I have a hard time with it. Now I'm also thinking it's also definitely possible that Ben could have even pretended to be a bad diver and careless and make this whole scene so that he could get away from his life. Though I do wonder why he would do that to his mom, unless he was just going to kill himself. And in that case, you can't really, someone that is going to kill themselves isn't going to not kill themselves because of the other people in their lives, I don't think. I think it's going to consume them enough to make them just do it.
I don't know if I don't know, maybe I just don't see why you'd kill yourself that way, though. That seems a little pretty long, drawn out, but who knows?
Well, I mean, he didn't obviously kill himself. You mean by just like staging all of this stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because there was like another weird aspect of it is the new tank that was found inside of the cave. With his name written around on the top of the tank. That's how the dive shop wrote their information on the tanks, and Ben's other two tanks had his information down at the bottom. So that was also slightly interesting, but maybe he just got a brand new tank and wanted to start doing it that way because it made more sense and it was more visible. Who really knows? Something happened to him down there, and I'm not sure. I just don't know who is responsible for moving his body out of the cave.
I there's definitely something shady and unknown going on here, and I don't think we'll ever really find out.
I mean, maybe not. It's definitely a head scratcher of a case for sure.
Yes.
Like I said, it's a certified doozy. So okay. Well, I'm pretty sure that's all I have.
That's all I have for the case.
Yeah. It's another one of those ones where it's like, well, we just leave you with no answers here, but it's pretty creepy for sure. When I read about it, I was like, I remember watching the Disappeared. Yeah, I mean, I remembered it slightly, but it just seems like a really creepy, the whole thing is very ominous all around.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm interested in hearing everybody else's theories.
For sure.
Too.
I feel like we keep covering people that are going through some sort of episode. And it's putting them in a vulnerable position that ends up with them dying, unfortunately. So, okay. So, thanks for listening.
Let us know what you think. Yeah. And everybody have a very creepy rest of your week.
Have a creepy week. Email us at creeperrealpod@gmail.com if you want to talk, or on our Instagram you can talk to us too. Or Facebook if you want to just leave us comments about what you think happened with McDaniel down in Vortex Springs. All right, guys. See you later.